are listening to Neurosalience, the OHBM podcast.
Welcome to the Organization for Human Brain Mapping Neurosalience podcast. I'm your host, Peter Bannattini. Here I interview brain scientists and discuss their work as well as the latest advancements and challenges in the field of brain mapping. This episode is timely. On the podcast today are the leaders of three of the major societies. Ron Mangun is a member of the leadership board of the Cognitive Neuroscience Society. Fernando Calamante is the president of the International Society for Magnetic Resonance in Medicine. And Randy Gollub is president of the Organization for Human Brain Mapping. All of these societies are planning in-person meetings for the spring and early summer of 2022. CNS, Cognitive Neuroscience Society, will be from April 13th to the 26th in San Francisco. ISMRM will be from May 7th to 12th in London. And OHBM will be from June 19th to the 23rd in Glasgow. All the meetings will have a virtual component, but the precise logistics for how to best simultaneously put on the virtual and in-person meetings, all agreed, are tricky and still being ironed out. We start the discussion by going over how these societies had to quickly pivot and then scramble once COVID hit, and then talked about the challenges and lessons learned from this experience. We discussed what they anticipate and look forward to for the meetings in the spring, as well as some of the benefits that have come out of this deeply challenging time. This was a fun and formative discussion, but was also a glimpse into how the leaders are all struggling with this new landscape of hybrid meeting planning. While there were some differences in particular strategies used by each society, there was overall a strong convergence in the approaches. Just a quick background on each of the leaders. So Fernando Calamante is director of the Sydney Imaging Core Research Facility at the University of Sydney. Randy Gollub is professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and clinical professor of psychiatry with a secondary appointment in radiology at the Mass General Hospital. And Ron Mangun is director of the Center for Mind and Brain and also a distinguished professor of psychology and neurology at the University of California, Davis. Enjoyed the discussion. Okay, thank you, Ron Mangun, Randy Gollub, and Fernando Calamante, all the leadership from OHBM, or actually from CNS and respectively CNS, OHBM, and ISMRM, here today to just talk about, I think, what's on a lot of people's minds, sort of, how we're going to handle, opening back up again after, hopefully COVID, works itself through and we can open up again. And all the things that all the meetings had to scramble, and it's been kind of a mess. And maybe just to start this conversation, we can just talk a little bit, each of you, just to talk a little bit about kind of what you went through when COVID first hit. So and then maybe what you learned about hybrid meetings, or not even hybrid meetings, purely virtual meetings, and what you had to do and how that may have affected membership or attendance or just scientific dissemination in general. So maybe I'll start with Ron here.
Sure. Well, first, Peter, thanks for inviting me. And this is really a timely podcast you're doing, so I'm really happy to be here. As I mentioned before we started, I hope to learn as much as I deliver information. So for us, the Cognitive Neuroscience Society, which is about 28 years old, going into its 29th year or so, had a dramatic, to us, a rather dramatic experience with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. So our meeting in 2020 in the spring was set for March, I think it was March 15th, middle of March.
Yeah.
And it was set in Boston. And that's just, as you remember, as we're going into this, there were a couple of one big meeting in particular that had canceled about a month before, but a lot of people were sort of hanging in there. And at our venue in Boston, which was part of the convention center there in a hotel, all the meetings were still going ahead up until late February. But we were, of course, watching it very carefully and trying to gauge, what the risk and what should, I think in those days, we could all say nobody really knew what was going on, and we were all desperate to try to figure it out. Now, we had a little a kind of gauge though, and that is 1 week before us in the same venue at Boston, one of the big international virology meetings was happening.
Yeah, that was the one that was a super spreader event, right?
Well, no, not that.
Oh, that was the Pfizer
Oh, that's
meeting.
okay.
That was a different one. So we were watching this big meeting that was coming in the same space right before us, full of experts on these exact topics. And they were continuing to put their meeting on. They were going to be there March 7th or something. Every day I'd wake up, I'm not kidding, and look and see if they had canceled. And then a few people canceled, some soccer teams and some events that were coming in the convention center. And so we kind of kept pushing forward with the idea that we're going to have the meeting, and people were writing us, and there was a lot of concern, but we didn't know enough yet. The super spreader thing wasn't made public at that point, the Boston super spreader.
That's right. Yeah.
It was just coming. And then the day before this other group was to meet, they pulled the plug. And then about 5 minutes later, we did too. So if the virologists,
right, and that's
and epidemiologists and all of those folks decide that they're not going to meet in that space, there was no way we were going to. We were, health first, health and safety first. So we pulled the plug. The next step, of course, was to decide, what does that mean? Are we simply canceling? We had the full program, and we were 2 weeks away. At this point, we were about 10 days out or something. And what are we going to do? People hadn't yet started traveling there, so it wasn't, that was not as much of a problem. Maybe some people had. So we thought about it carefully, and with absolutely no experience in doing this, we made the decision to pivot to a virtual meeting. So our meeting was entirely in person. It was not a hybrid at that point. We were not simulcasting at that point. We'd had no experience with that technology. So in a very short period of time, we'd been working on it since early February, trying to figure out what we would do if, what are the companies out there that could help us? What are the technologies? Who knows about anything about this? So we've been doing our homework, and we decided to pivot to a virtual meeting and to delay it, to give us about 5 weeks or so to early May. And then we went to work, and I'm not kidding, I think it was 10 hours a day, every day for the next 5 weeks to get it to happen. And what we asked people to do was to record everything and to send their talks. And we did another thing that was, and this was telling about, what did we learn from it? One of the things that we learned was we decided that we could open up the poster sessions, because the rest of our meeting, which is mostly organized symposia, was all pretty structured. Yeah. And award talks and so on. But the posters, which is structured, but posters are a little different animal. We decided to open a new call for posters. Now we're going to be virtual. Yeah. We knew that there were students and people all over the world who couldn't come, they can't make it this year, and they decided not to come. And much to my surprise, we picked up, and I don't have numbers at the top of my head, but more than 300 additional posters. Wow. After we opened it up again. Yeah, making it the biggest meeting ever for us in terms of poster presentations. That's so, yeah, so that was remarkable. And what it tells us, of course, is just what you'd imagine, that there are a lot of people who can't come to the meeting for all sorts of reasons. And the idea that you can have a virtual meeting and have this inclusivity as part of it, I think is a really important thing. That's one of the big things that all of us are going to, I'm sure, talk about. And it's one of the things that we learned, and it's guiding our decisions as we go forward here. Yeah. Well, how about Randy?
I just have a quick follow-up question for Ron, if that's okay. It's like,
sure.
How did you manifest your poster experience? What was that like? What was it like for the poster presenters and for the attendees? How did you make that work?
Well, it was, we contracted with a group that does virtual meetings. And so we used their platform, and it was sort of simply a virtual poster booth. Every person got a booth, and this is 2 years ago now. This is at the pandemic time, the start of the pandemic. Everybody got a booth on this website and they could upload their poster. And we didn't have any way to interact in that system, but of course, all the young folks figured that out real quick. They would post their Zoom link in there, and then they would all jump on. And at some point, somebody says, "Hey, people are Zooming at their posters," and I said, "How what does that mean? How? Why?" You know, it's a classic answer from my generation. How's that go? And they just figured it out. And so then I jumped on a couple of those and saw, and it was 10 people standing around, all talking. So that's how we did it the first year. We didn't intend for that. If we would have known, we would have just advertised it, but we were just scrambling with no experience. The second year was, of course, a whole different arrangement. Now you have a year and you have experience in your pocket. So 2021, we did the whole meeting virtual as planned in advance, and we used a different platform. And now we built in some tools in advance to have these kind of interactions. And I don't want to mention the exact tools that we used, because I want to be able to speak freely, and we may change them. But we used a tool that allowed for the social interaction, one of those kinds of tools that exist at the posters. And that helped. But I think that even something as simple as everybody has a Zoom thing at a certain time works really well. Yep. And then we also, but what I maybe didn't say was people for their posters pre-recorded the presentation as well for the first meeting and for the second. So you had your time where you're going to be there and people come on live, but you also, anytime you want, you can go see the poster as a big PDF, or you can click on the video. And we got some hilarious videos that were, again, creative, especially trainees who would make use of the fact that they were boxes on a screen and looking back and forth at one another. Maybe you can imagine that, looking up and down. Okay, why don't you tell about the method? Yeah, I'll tell about the thing. It was great.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Well, if anything, we should talk about that more too, of all the creativity that kind of came out of this. I mean, all kinds of interesting things as far as that's concerned. But Randy, I don't know. I mean, right, you were sort of part of the leadership, but at the same time,
Yeah. So as chair-elect, I was watching what happened, but for OHBM, the timing was just slightly enough staggered that we had, advance warning of months that we had to pivot, and so not days. And so we were able to keep our same dates for the meeting, which occurs in June, but the decision to pivot came in March. I mean, everything shut in March. So we had from March till June to switch. And we went with a vendor that, was able to support much of the content shifting and much of the ways that Ron was talking about, where the plenary talks were live streamed, but there were recordings available. We scrambled to get more things recorded. And then the posters just were very, very challenging, as that platform did not support the posters. But we have an amazing cohort of attendees that includes some really savvy folks who learned how to scrape all the poster material out of the system and built a giant, again, one of these social media platforms that allows people to visit and go in and social interact in there. Again, I will also, to speak freely, not use the names of things. And there was, there's a little bit of a tension between, the official grown-up way you're supposed to go to the meeting and handle these things, and then the way that they figured out how to make it work. And they both had pluses and minuses. None of it was as good as being in person by far. There's not a person who told me that, all things being equal, they just love this virtual and never go back in person. But the inclusivity piece about how many people could come and could participate, and who have small children but could still be there, or have disabilities but could still be here, or had funding constraints or could still be there, or had travel restrictions in their home that would have been there whether it was COVID or not, and they could be there. That was a huge win. So that was really lifted up in a really big way in that year and in the next year. So we were all virtual the second year, and again had, as you said, had the time to plan. We went all feet in on a investment with another platform that, and we created something called Planet Brain. We made our own unique universe that we had brains doing yoga, and we had, plenary sessions in their own rooms, and we had screening. We had, it was actually parts of it worked extremely well. There were parts of our community that loved how well it worked, and particularly that group that had learned how to hack into the previous one, our open science team that developed software tools and was very, very creative and very tech savvy. They made wonderful use of that platform and really facilitated a lot of their work. The hackathons merged in smoothly. Our student postdoc SIGs, they were able to interact in ways that were pretty robust, but still there was a huge frustration with, the quality of the experience did not live up to its full hopes or expectations. It was still like a teenage event working to grow up. And so we're still working with that. So there were a lot of wins to that, and there were a lot of limitations. And so we were able to live stream the talks, record, people were speaking live, and we did something that I think there was a lot of innovation that arose in that second year, was that all of our big keynote speakers and plenary talks, the Talerac talks, they pre-recorded their content, and it was available for screening, and people got into it, a little bit before the meeting. But then during the scheduled time when they were delivering it in person, they gave a sort of a condensed version, like a 20-minute version. And our program committee would be on as a moderator, and they brokered this wonderful question and answer sort of exploratory conversation with the keynote speakers that our audience, both, everybody was virtual, could chat in their questions and send in information. So it was much more interactive than a typical keynote would be. And I think there was a lot, and we also, because it was all virtual and we were trying as an international society, trying so hard to, reach, we wanted Fernando and all of his team to come. We wanted everybody to come in Australia and Asia and everywhere. And so we actually ran this at multiple times. The same things would rotate in multiple time zones, and so that more people could access it. And then the same speaker would do that same thing interactively a couple times. And so that there's also a richness to that would happen, because we had really great, there's so many wonderful people doing this work and very eloquent, and they can carry on these great conversations. And so I think that made it much more lively. And then we left the site up and I think it might still be up. So that the recorded talks people could go into for, long after the meeting was over. And that was really beneficial, that, people kept coming back to look at stuff for a long time. The tailing off was slow.
Yeah.
I'll pause there. There's a lot more, but that's a good start.
Yeah, that's a great start. Yeah, I remember that. I mean, right, there was a lot of, it's nice how it's sort of the community sort of stepped up to solve some of these problems. And yeah, and right, we'll talk about all the potential, positive things coming out of this. And I think there were. And I think also, not only did the meeting have to figure out how to give this sort of thing, but the audience, I sort of got better at doing virtual meetings over time as well, the second year. But yeah, Fernando, I just remember watching ISMRM and just wondering, what the heck are they going to do? And I'm feeling bad for Larry Wald, who was the president at the time, and thinking, oh my gosh, this is a disaster, because he kept on putting it off. And then, so please tell me.
Yeah. For us, I mean, there are some analogies with Ron and Randy, but also some very differences. And I guess the key one is maybe what the one you're referring, that our meeting was scheduled to be in May in Sydney, here in Australia. And as you might remember, Australia was one of the countries that very, very quickly kind of locked the borders, closed the borders. Nobody could come, nobody could leave. And the distance also was a factor. So kind of very quickly became obvious that it wasn't going to be doable, the meeting in Sydney. But still we thought that it could be, there was a chance to do it still in person. So there was a lot of work for the central office to try to arrange. So we managed to move the meeting to Paris, was going to then be.
Yes, that's right. You moved to Paris, right?
Yeah, and kind of that was what we was kind of as late as we could push it without affecting too much the 2021 meeting. So kind of it was moved from May in Sydney to August in Paris. But then as things evolved and obviously the pandemic got worse and worse, became obvious that then that wasn't going to be possible too. And then that's when the call had to be made that it moved into virtual. So for poor, Doug Knoll, that was the program chair for that year, he had to organize a meeting for Sydney, then organize a meeting for an in-person meeting for Paris, then organize a virtual meeting for
oh my God.
It was I mean, I don't. I wouldn't want to be in his shoes.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, but I think, I mean, and I think probably his experience with also with CNS and OHBM, I think the community was very understanding that this was something that we all have to, react on our feet there. And even though the meetings were obviously not as interactive as, all the networking is gone, all the things, I was surprised how understanding and how, accepting everybody was, because they saw that, we were putting all in a situation where it was completely unpredicted, completely not done. And we were all trying to do our best to present the best meeting that could be done. And so I thought it was great how people responded very, very well, the people attending.
Yeah.
From our side, what in some way were complicated a bit things, and we knew when we made a decision was that if we push it till August in 2020, that meant that we didn't have a full year. We didn't want to start shifting things. We wanted to go back to the original schedule.
Yes.
So that meant that year, so the meeting that just that was here in May 2021, everything got shrunk. And I remember at the time, with Nicole, that was the program chair, Nicole Cyberlich, and Tim Liner, the president, we were very concerned that between a shorter time and that people have been kept away from their labs, how much work was going to be submitted. That was a real concern at the meeting of the 2021. There was a big, big relief when it got to the submission day, and we got again very, very good and healthy numbers of abstracts, even though it had been a shorter time and all that. But that was, I think, an extra source of stress for everybody, because suddenly year became a much shorter time for everybody. And the same, you can imagine, for organizing the meeting, planning the meeting, and everything got shrunk together.
Yeah.
But yes, but apart from that, it's very similar to what Ron and Randy said, that is, trying to find ways to how we could use the technology of Sabala, what could be implemented. But as I said, I think the key one is that the attendees were very understanding, and then embraced that the situation that still got the most of what it could be done. Everybody understood that we were trying to do all our best.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems that at that time, right, all the meeting software tools, I mean, no one had virtual meeting software tools. And so that was all just kind of crude. But then that's one thing that could be a huge catalyst in the future, is that's a big market now. It's going to be hugely, much more sophisticated, as we go to, even hybrid meetings or whatever. And so, yeah, I think that, people struggled. It's funny because I feel like, right. I mean, we could talk about this too, but I mean, there's huge benefits of being in person. But at the same time, you might actually be able to get the information and be able to hold on to it more and refer to it better if it's virtual. So, I mean, there's all kinds of trade-offs, obviously, but overall, everyone wants in person. But yeah.
Yeah, and I agree, Peter. I'm sure we can discuss it more later on. But it's one of the things that I noticed, and I'm coming from a non-English speaking background originally. It is a big advantage for people with English might be not that comfortable. It is so much easier to follow a talk and pause it and play it again and all that. To understand it and be on a room full of noise, surrounded by people talking to each other and all that, and suddenly have to listen to a presenter. So there are definitely some benefits. And that's, for example, the pre-recorded talks. It was something that people really welcome. I mean, it has some disadvantages that also we can discuss. It seems to then spread a 1 week meeting ends up and spreading for 2, 3, or whatever it is weeks. It's just, but it does come with benefit, and we can obviously discuss that more later on.
Yeah, that's a really good point about how obviously you have to deal with time zones, but also just dealing with the patience of, I have a hard time sitting in front of the computer listening to talks for some, it's like you have to spread it out longer as well, it seems. And I don't know how all of you dealt with that as well, but was the meeting, I mean, yeah, so with OHBM, it was 2 weeks, right? I mean,
So we did two different things, in different years. And the first year we did spread it out over. We tried to condense it all because we didn't know any better. Just like we tried to virtually match it. The second year it did get spread out, because there was so much going on and you couldn't count on people holding still, and we didn't want to cut any content and on and on. And so, it didn't, we spread it out by making the education program be its own separate week. And I think the education week, educational programming, which attracted, as good as ever of an attendance. I think the attendance was as high as it even was ever in person. And I got very good feedback. We did a lot of surveying, asking people what they thought about it, and tried to collect data on what people were saying about their experiences through this whole thing. And they, in this past year where we had time to plan and we were on our all virtual platform, that platform supported the educational interactions quite well. And there was not a lot of complaining about it, a lot of complaints with it, that, there was enough bandwidth, people had time, it was the right amount, it worked well. When we upped it to the thousands of people that were trying to be on the platform simultaneously and do all different things, that didn't hold up to that, and that was more of a strain. And honestly, it was really hard from the perspective of those of us who are running the meeting and the office that supports all this, to have a conference that's running literally almost 24 hours a day, day after day after day. If you're trying, because when people are in person for a meeting, even if it's a long day, it's 7 to 7, or then you go out and socialize or whatever. But when you're virtual, you're 24 hours, because that OHBM's membership is very heavy, and we have a wonderful contingent in China and Korea and Singapore, and we have people, a wonderful group in Australia. We have, we are not on one time zone, even remotely. And while I think people are very good natured about staying up late or getting up early to try and get what they want, it's still, I think it was biased. We had much better attendance in the band that mapped to peak hours for North America and Europe. And even though we offered all the content at the Asia-Europe bandwidth, we had many fewer people. And that brings up another point, which is, I think, access. Even with the best attention to trying to get tools and technologies that are globally robust, there are a lot of countries and a lot of places and institutions and people who don't have access to really good quality internet, or who have, filtering things that happen that, if they could get out to the meeting, they can actually interact much more openly and capably. But the internet does pose challenges. And so it's hard to assess, that, because they can't really tell us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's hard. You're right. It actually never occurred to me that, right. I mean, it's great to have access if people can't travel, but then they might not have as much access if they have some sort of, regulations. So let me just, Radha, do you want to add something? I was about to go into what you plan, but yeah. So what are you planning? Maybe you could start talking about that. So what's the plan for? So I'll start with Ron, because CNS is in April. It's coming up April 23rd to 26th in San Francisco. The poster submission deadline is January 11th. Symposium submission deadline is December 15th. And so what are your plans for CNS? How do you plan on putting it on in person? Is there a hybrid version? Is there contingency plans in case it has to cancel? Or you said,
yeah, this is where I sign off. Nice talking to you, Peter. So we made the decision last year to of course go virtual again, and at that time we were able to negotiate with our venue to delay our contract for a year, but with a pretty firm contract then. And so we've been keeping all of our fingers and appendages crossed in the last year or so, hoping that April 2022 would look good. Right now it looks okay, and we are planning to have an in-person meeting in San Francisco, California, April 23rd to 26th, 2022. And people want that, as everybody has said. It's something that people desire. In fact, they're craving it, and for a lot of interesting reasons. And I think that, one of the reasons that is obvious once you say it, but isn't always what the first thing out of people's mouths. People say, "Oh, I'm stuck at home, and I'm just tired of this. I want to get out and see people again. I want to have the life I used to have." Well, about 75% of the people who attend the Cognitive Neuroscience Society meeting are trainees at doctoral, postdoctoral levels. And some of those folks have never been to the meeting yet. And so for them, it's not sort of just want to get back to normal. It's like they'd like to have a career. They'd like to have an experience. They'd like to have the chance to go and present their work to somebody face to face. So we take that very seriously. You know, we think that that's really important. It's one of the reasons, by the way, recognizing this about the attendees of our meeting, it's one of the reasons that we put in the effort to sort of dramatically pivot to that and over a short period of time to that virtual meeting the very first year, because we very strongly felt, the governing board felt that that the people that were going to be harmed were the people we least wanted to have harmed by this, and so we wanted to give them some experience, and so we're going to go forward with an in-person meeting, assuming that everything stays roughly as it is now. And we're a bit lucky, of course. It depends on where you are in the world and what the local government situation is and so on. San Francisco, California is a good place to be right at this moment. California is doing well. San Francisco has been very aggressive on health and safety. They have great policies in place. The hotel and convention area that we're using has great policies in place. And we're pretty confident that if nothing changes, which of course we all know with the variants and so on, it's all up in the air, can be up in the air. But we're feeling confident going into it that this is the best of possibilities right now. Okay, the timing is great also, end of April. If it were earlier, some years were a month earlier or so, and that would have been a little more touchy. So we're hoping for the best. And we're pushing forward with an in-person meeting, but it's going to be, we intend for it, and we're still working on the details. So if you're a member of the society or someone who was going to come to the meeting, you're learning something right here on this blog. You know, we're still working on exactly how to push it out in the hybrid version as well. One of the things that we decided when we went through the COVID-19 experience and putting on the virtual meetings the last 2 years is that we didn't want to go back exactly to the in-person meeting by itself as it was in the old days. We feel very strongly, and many of our members feel very strongly. And when I say we, I mean our members, because that's who we are. It's all the membership, right? You know, we feel very strongly about the carbon footprint concerns, very strongly about inclusivity, and very, very strongly about giving people the opportunity to present their work and to interact who can't do it for lots of reasons, some of the reasons that Randy said. And there are a lot of reasons. It's not just about COVID-19 or about money. It's about politics. It's about personal health. It's about having, 3 kids under the age of 5 at home, whatever it is, right? Or elderly parents that you got to take care of. And we want those people to have access. So we're working through, I mean, literally as we speak, exactly how we're going to manage that. And there's some technical things that you have to deal with that are sort of a little bit outside of your control when you go to a venue. You know, you have to rely a little bit on the infrastructure at the venue you're using. You have to figure out how that's exactly going to work. And of course, all of those places are just figuring that out themselves right now as well.
Yeah.
So they don't have a solution. They don't say, oh yeah, we always do the following. Well, they haven't done it before. So you're kind of leading them, you're like a beta site in a sense, but we're moving forward with this, and we're working on just exactly how, but the other part of it is, and this is something that the way we announced it, we actually need to, we're working right now, editing how we're pushing out information to folks. We always feel like our information isn't quite good enough, and so we're always trying a little harder. We are making it the request that if you're, like in the past, if you're going to come give a talk, if you're going to organize a symposia, which is most of our presentations are these symposia, and there's only, we run them in parallel now, but only usually 2 or sometimes 3. That's about it. So for many years we had no parallel sessions, and we kind of had to finally let go of that. But it's still a little bit smaller meeting than the other meetings. So we still want people to attend, though. That's our first request. Requirement is too strong of a term, right? Because we're doing this to ourselves as a society. We want people to say, well, I'm coming to the meeting, just as they would have several years ago. If you're gonna present, and assuming all of the things line up, I mean, of course, you can't come if your country won't let you out. You can't come if our country won't let you in. You can't come if you have health issues or other problems or restrictions. And maybe none of us can come if everything turns south, right? But assuming that things are looking good. So I'm at the University of California at Davis. we're a university of 40,000 people, and we're all on campus. We're teaching in person. The campus looks pretty normal when you walk across the campus. Everybody's, there are people working remotely. We still have that option and so on, but everything otherwise is back to normal. And it's enabled in our situation, thankfully, by the fact that we have regular testing and requirements and so on. So we're in a good situation. But we're already doing that, and I think that there's a lot of reason to be positive that we'll be able to do this at the meeting if nothing changes. And then the question for everybody is that every individual person has to make their own decision about what they feel comfortable with. We understand that, coming or not, and how they're going to handle it. And then we're just struggling right now, and I hope to learn something from my colleagues here about the best way to create a hybrid meeting where we don't lose the in-person part. If you're going to this is a big concern for, I think, anybody. If you're going to have an in-person meeting and someone is going to get on an airplane and fly to the meeting, nobody wants to sit in a room and watch a virtual presentation. That doesn't make any sense, right? Doesn't make any sense.
That's the risk.
Yeah. So the meeting can be smaller. So that's why we're going with the idea. No, this is an in-person meeting. You're coming to an in-person meeting. But for those who can't come, we don't want to leave them behind for all the inclusivity and carbon footprint reasons in the future of hybrid meetings. We don't want to lose all that. So this is our test case. We're on the raw cutting edge of trying to figure out how to get this right. And we're hearing a lot from our membership, and we're getting suggestions. And as Fernando said earlier, it's really remarkable. And I just have to say, it's remarkable the extent to which people have been understanding and willing to help. It's a wonderful community that we get to be part of in academia and science, right? And people have the best side has come out. Sure, people are upset about some things sometimes, but the best sides have come out. And, I think that's what we're seeing as well with this upcoming meeting. People are really trying to figure out, okay, how would we make this work? And how can it be fair and equitable and yet exciting and so on? How can those trainees get their first meeting or the first meeting before they're on the job market, right? Whatever it might be. And how can we make that something special? All the things that we got to do, in our careers we were developing, how can we deliver that for those people and keep them safe at the same time?
Yeah, you can imagine, I was just thinking about the virtual, in-person options, but I mean, you can imagine, right, only having the streaming out. You could actually have the real time in person, but also have that stream out. And then if somebody cancels at the last minute, they can make a recording, but that could be, after the fact. They can actually, it's sort of like a disincentive to do that, but they still would not be penalized too much or something like that.
That's right. I mean, I think, in normal times, people get sick, they could get a bad cold or something, they can't travel, or they just can't manage, or their flight gets canceled and they can't come. And the policies are not really much different for now as they were in the past, which is the symposia chair, in our case, symposia chairs, have the opportunity to replace the person, drop the person if they feel that they've got a big enough, you got, instead of 5 people, they have 4. Okay, so there'll be more time for discussion. That's not always bad. Or in the past, we've had times over the last 20 years where people zoomed in and what was Skyped in or something, or sent a recording. We've done that a few times. So that hasn't changed, so we still have, of course, all of that flexibility, and we need it. People are going to have a lot of travel challenges, and things can come up at the last minute, and you could just be getting ready to get on the plane and have a positive test, and that's it then. So I think that in some sense, that's not so different, as it was. I think the real difference for us as a society is we've never done the live streaming of things, and we're trying to figure out how to make that work in a seamless way. But we do hope that people come to San Francisco and people tell us that they want to, that in fact, they're begging us to put on a meeting. So let's hope that everybody cross your fingers simultaneously, please.
Yeah, and this is sort of like a question also. I hope it happens, right? But this is a question for everyone too. Is there, an objective criteria for canceling the in-person version? Or is it just basically sort of, coming together and meeting and seeing what happens?
Well, for us, I think it's, we've thought about this. I mean, we trust our colleagues. If people say they're going to come give their talk, that's all they have to tell us. And when at the last minute, something happens, something changes, and they say, I really can't now, I think we take that at face value, and then we go through this procedure of what are we going to do? Replace them, drop them, zoom them in? What does the chair want to do for the science?
That's a by session decision, as opposed to like, what about the whole meeting? Like, what would happen if, variant Z happens and suddenly...
Yeah, and is there
then we
pivot?
We pivot to 2021. Then that's the backup plan. We haven't talked about backup plans yet. I mean, no, there's absolutely a backup plan.
But is there a decision, like, for instance, it's just basically just, this is the hard part, right? I mean, where you're sort of like, look, I don't even know exactly what happened with SFN, for instance, but I mean, there must have been some decision criteria where they said, oh, well, infection rate, or maybe it was just simply determined by the, the rate of in-person attendance. Like they projected, like, how many people are actually going to be here, and if it's below a certain number, maybe they have to cancel it or something. Who knows? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, so I'm pretty concerned about that. So that idea of that, not wanting our members to suffer that, we call it bait and switch, where you're planning one thing and you have to go to something else, and it's very disruptive because you've made certain plans or you've spent money for your travel or whatever it is. It causes disruption. We've been very mindful thinking about that for OHBM's upcoming meeting, and so and like what you have said, I think everybody's saying is like, people are hungry for coming in person for all those reasons and all the other things. So yes, and everything was said. For OHBM, what we're working on is a very clear timeline and really working hard on what will be the rollout of communications to everybody so that they know what the expectations are. And we, almost like your virology conference in Boston, we're really lucky that we're going to be in Glasgow, Scotland, which is also a beautiful, beautiful place to be that people are very happy and eager to go to. It also happens to have won like 1 million awards for being green and being one of the, for all its sustainability things and healthy food and all this stuff. And so we're really delighted. And also the global climate conference is scheduled to be there in like a week or 10 days. So we're kind of watching how they do things and figuring if they're going to be able to host the world leaders from all over the globe safely in the time of a pretty bad, COVID's still pretty bad, and they're going to manage it. We're really, really psyched that that's going to be our host in June, where hopefully we'll have even all the more lessons learned over the next 6 months. And so we have negotiated very carefully with them our contract, which has a drop dead date, which we're going to widely, let everybody know that, up until May 5th, we can reschedule with them for a future date like you did in San Francisco. And so we will let everybody know that we in leadership of OHBM, our members will know that we will not go away from an in-person meeting after the date of May 5th. And I'll take this one to the bank, unless the disclaimer is, unless Scotland or powers greater than us say you can't go. It will not be OHBM leadership that will change the in-person meeting after May 5th. And so if people want to wait to make their reservations, or we've been reassured that there's tons of hotels, that they've got capacity for meeting 10 times our size. And so if they want to wait to make their travel plans until after that date, they absolutely can. That's on them to choose. We don't have any punishing deadlines on any of the hotel reservations or anything. And the way we're managing registration is that anybody who registers for the in-person meeting, if we cancel it and have to pivot to all virtual, they will be refunded the difference between, I should just give another disclaimer. This is what's getting proposed to council. It has not yet been voted on. Like everybody else, we're working everything out. The council meeting is coming up. We're putting the budget in front of them. There may be, things that will get modified, but the conceptual frame is that there'll be a lower fee for registering for your virtual meeting, a higher fee for the in-person one. But if we have to pivot at the last moment for reasons that we have no control over, we will reimburse you the difference between the in-person and the full meeting, if we can do that, if we know that by May 5th, because then we'll be able to move and retain our deposit for a future meeting at the site in the future. And so then it's not a loss to the society. And so we'll be very clear about all that, language with them. And the goal is to try and have it be in person. And as you were saying, we want it to be a real experience in person. And so the poster session will be in person. The virtual component of streaming talks and letting people chat in questions for speakers, that can happen in the real meeting, which will run on Glasgow hours. And then we'll have the goal is to have a subsequent virtual full poster extravaganza that we're still working out that will not be at the same time as the main meeting. And so poster presenters will do both their duty in person and also their duty virtually, and people will have both opportunities. And all the content, no matter what happens, as our safety net, everything's going to be recorded, everything's going to be turned in advance, so that if we have to make a pivot, it's not a frantic do it crazy thing. It's like good quality content that people will want archived and want to have access to. And we're really working on improving the experience that people have seeing those recorded content, seeing the posters, seeing the talks, and creating a richer experience around that, because that is a real blessing of this pivot. You know? Yeah.
So once again, though, let's say, I mean, let's hope, right, that you have a lot of people signing up for the meeting, and yeah, I think that's, and I'm just trying to convey the idea that it's really hard to sort of like, I mean, you'll be the one to make the call if
it's crazy. And one of the things that we also did was like, we went with safety first, like, right. And so what we did is we went ahead and booked for all the space in Glasgow. It's more expensive, but we did. And we did it because if we get lucky and there's this pent up, everybody hasn't been spending their travel budgets, as Fernando said, people have a lot of material. They've got nothing else to do. They can't travel or go anywhere. They're home analyzing data. They've got posters, they've got abstracts, they've got stuff to, they're looking for jobs. They want to be out. So if we have, the blessing of being inundated with our biggest meeting ever, we have enough space to do it in a COVID safe way, so that people have some, can keep some distance, cannot be crowded, can have lots of entrances and exits, have that space to do this safely. And the COVID protocols, safety protocols are robust in Glasgow, and we will enforce every bit of them. And so we can have a big meeting, but in the off chance that, things are dicey, and only, the people in Scotland or England and Scotland can get there because they can take a train and it's close enough, we're going to still host that in-person meeting, but we'll be even gladder we have our space because they're going to want even more area around them. And so it's kind of win-win in that respect. And so that's what, that's the plan.
Yeah. So Fernando, so what are the plans? Yeah. So ISMRM is coming up in May. So yeah, OHBM is June 19th to 23rd. ISMRM is May 7th to 12th in London. So what are your?
So I mean, I guess there were the two good things to discuss there of the bins to discuss. I start with the last one just because the one that is closer in my mind. So you asked, is there how do you decide when you switch to the format? And unfortunately, and I'm sure Randy and Ron would confirm, there is no magic formula. It's not something you say when you reach to the threshold, you switch the button. So if I look back at how we did it both in 2020 and 2021, there was tons and tons of meetings by the other leaders, the board, the program chair, the central office, and keeping an eye on lots of things. So it is really, unfortunately, there is no magic formula. But kind of we learn the benefit that we have, or let's say that I have now compared to Tim last year and Larry the year before as presidents, is that I have that experience of what they had to do. And for example, one of the things that we learn from the experience is that it's unlikely that we would be changing the date because that creates too much extra work for everybody, for the central office, for program chair, uncertainty for the membership and the attendees and all that. So it is unlikely that would be the case, or that would need to be a real clear benefit and to say that we're going to consider that again. And then what we did in 2021, so this year, the meeting that happened in May, it was, the meeting, Nicole Cyberlich, I was the program chair, from the very start, planned a program that was going to be hybrid. We were aiming for a hybrid, and we had made already that decision. But that if we needed to swap to an online, it wasn't going to be, if you own the same complications that the year before had, it was going to be an easier switch to a virtual one. And when to make that call, as I said, it was a combination of looking at how things were evolving with the pandemic, but also the other big trigger is when is the latest that you can start planning, if you did for a hybrid, going for an online and still put all the format and all the abstracts in their place. And so there was a time in our case is that when the program committee meets to decide all that essentially is as late as we can push it. Beyond that, we can push it.
Okay.
And then so we might make the call before that if the pandemic, it becomes clear that anyway there is no point in keep on waiting because the decision is made. But otherwise, once we get to that point, we need to make a decision. And this year it's going to be a similar thing. But I agree with Ron and also with Randy, what you said is this year in some ways looking much better. And so we are very optimistic that there will be a meeting. And so coming back now to your first question of this block, how the meeting is going to be, we decided, we did a strategic review about how our meeting was going to be, the formats earlier in the year or late last year, and now I'm getting all mixed up. And the decision was made that we were moving to, from now on meetings would have a hybrid component. There would be always, they would have an online part. That's the decision. And to be fair, this is not something that was created by the pandemic. It was very clear, and I think Ron emphasized that there was a big movement to, people that for environmental reasons don't want to travel, for family reasons, personal reasons, others commitments, professional commitment, language barriers, financial, you name it.
Yep.
It was coming. There was the pandemic. The only thing was just sped up the decision of how we need to move to a hybrid format, but it was on the cards already.
Yeah.
So the 2022 meeting in London in May will be a hybrid meeting. I completely agree with what Ron's sentiment, and it's exactly what we're thinking, that we can't sacrifice the in-person part. Can be then you can't have people in our case in London sitting at the ISMRM meeting just watching recording press there on the screen. It just would be absolutely mad.
Yeah.
And also there is no reason to do that. So same to what you hear is, unfortunately, I can't tell you everything in the sense because we are in the middle of sorting out everything. So it's not that we have the final decision, but I mean, some things that we have made a decision is, for example, we won't be repeating sessions and multiple time zones. So we're trying to deal with the time zone in a slightly different way. So presenters don't still have to present in the middle of the night of their own time. And believe me, being from Australia, it happens a lot to us. That so I know firsthand how that works. But I mean, the reality is we all strike the same. It is, if you want for international societies like all of ours, it is the major problem is how to deal with time zones. And it's something that we're all trying to find ways to deal with that. And this is going to be a nice test case 2022 because we are all trying to come up with good strategies to deal with that.
Yeah, that's hard. So right. I can imagine, right? I mean, with virtual, so you expect that a person will be less flexible, but when we go overseas, we get jet lagged and we deal with it. And so,
I think the difficulty is, and again, I can say it because I've lived it in the, in these meetings, is I definitely have huge jet lag when I go abroad from Australia, and I love not to have that, and it's great. But when I'm having in these meetings, if I'm in the middle of the night on a session, my work here and my everything here, it's not that I'm not in Australia. So I can't just say, well, for a week, nobody can contact me. I'm not in, I disappear. So that's the bit that it doesn't just work. I'm as tired when I go to London myself from traveling from here for jet lag, that if I would be looking at sessions at 3 in the morning here. But the difference is then I can go to sleep there and not have to worry about anything else. I can't do that here because my work and my things here, the family, the kids going to school and all that still goes on, and I'm here.
Yeah,
so
that's really hard. Right.
Yeah, so I think that's a complicated. So we have, as I said, we haven't quite finalized the program, how they would work, but the ISMRM normally, even pre-pandemic, had 3 formats. That is the oral sessions, your power pitch presentations, so short talks and follow for the posters, and then your e-posters. What we are going to have is kind of a 4th type that is going to be the ones for online. So the presenters that are from outside. So it's not that we're going to start mixing sessions. Like in a session, you're going to have half of the people talking from online and half the people talking from.
Well, that's a great idea. Yeah.
But it's, we haven't yet quite finalized how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and all that. But yeah, we're going to try to be in London time and deal with that. But it's, yeah, it is the time zones is the headache for everybody. It's an unfortunate thing that we can't change.
Yeah, yeah. And so, right, I still, so do you anticipate, I mean, it's hard, it's almost impossible to predict. I mean, obviously when people register, you'll just look at the registration and try to figure out how many are coming. But do all of you anticipate that? I mean, it will obviously, you know, during these years, it's hard to know whether you'll break even with, you know, meetings and things like that. But do you anticipate that it will be a high enough attendance to, you know, to actually, will it be at least half of what it was before in person, or do you think more?
I've had wild speculations all the way from, like, almost nobody says super low unless, you know, for example, we have to stop it and not have it. I think that there's such a pent-up demand after going so many years without being together, that if people, you know, if are learning to live in a global pandemic, because it will still be a pandemic. I mean, no matter how good news is for the next months till April, May, June, there still will be COVID spreading and causing trouble in many, many places. And we might be lucky enough that our particular meetings and our particular persons who would come to our meetings are able to be enough protected, enough vaccinated, enough resourced, enough everything to have the privilege of gathering in person, because that's really what it is. You know, we are really privileged to have this opportunity, and we're all trying to do our best to be responsible and to do it respectfully and responsibly and all the good things. But we are really fortunate to be able to have this opportunity. You know, if we can do that, people want it a lot, because I think none of us here doubt the importance of those face-to-face interactions. Which of us hasn't started one of our best research projects or one of our coolest ideas from the conversation that we had with our buddies as we were walking from one spot to another at one of these meetings? And I don't know how many of you were fortunate enough to hear Carl Friston give his Glass Brain Award tribute speech, but he gave one of the most moving speeches I've ever heard at a convention. And basically what he said was, look around the room and look at the eye, look into the eyes of the people who are around you, because these are your colleagues and your friends and your peers. And these are the people who are going to be here for you and with you as you go through your career. And they're going to help you find your postdocs, and they're going to help you, you know, give you places to send your postdocs, and they're going to help you really achieve your full potential as a scientist, right? And that's what these meetings do. And doing that virtually is just really, it's not even a close second. It's not even a close third. It just isn't. And so, like, for the virtual bits of what we're going to do in 2022, we're not even going to pretend to do the social events that we did try to do some social events in Planet Brain. It was not a pretty sight.
Yeah, I found that really weird too. I mean, you know, not only for OHBM, but in general, I was with the ISMRM, and it's like you kind of show up, you're a little figure in Gathertown or whatever, and you kind of like, oh, you walk up to a person, oh, hi. And
virtual works for these small, like you know, we're recording this podcast over Zoom, and so we can see each other, and I'm enjoying very much seeing your faces. And what the people who are listening to us, they can't see, is that every time one of us is speaking, the other three heads are all just nodding up and down all the time, and we're all smiling and nodding at each other because yes, yes, yes. And you can't experience that over the audio, so the podcast is missing that. But that's on steroids, the problem with trying to do a virtual event with 3,000 people, because right. When you're at a meeting and you're trying to walk around, you're streaming out of a big plenary talk, and everybody's buzzing because that was just like the coolest thing you've ever heard. Because like CNS, most of the people who come to OHBM are postdocs and graduate students and young faculty, and they're this is exciting, and they've never seen, like, many of them have never traveled before. Many of them have never been in a room with this many people that did what they did and could relate to them and could talk their language, and so it's really exciting. And the ones who are all excited about making virtual work, it's because they just don't know what they're missing.
Right. That's a good point. That's a good point. You don't want to lose that. And people will realize, there's right, as you said, there's so much more information. There's so much more human connections. There's so many more spontaneous interactions that you get, which are really valuable as far as that's concerned. So,
and it's fun too. I mean, like
it's fun.
It's
fun to go someplace different where you, even San Francisco in the country is, I'd love to visit San Francisco again and soon, but so okay.
But
so
you have an open invitation, Peter, and I expect to see you there now on April 23rd.
All right. Well, I will, it's open. Yeah. So
Let's come.
All right. Well, I will seriously consider that. I'm suddenly I'll be gone the whole time and going to meetings. But yeah, no, I'm actually, I love, and I've been to all these meetings and I love them all, and they all have their, and that's another thing too. All the meetings, the personality of the meetings come out in person much more. I mean, each meeting has its own atmosphere, its own culture that you don't get as much just looking at the virtual part of it, which I think is really unique as well. So, okay, so then just to finalize, just to end this as we're approaching the hour here. So what do you think? Okay, so we're all keeping our fingers crossed. We're all, going full steam ahead. We're going to have these meetings, but what do you think actually has been the benefit? Certainly COVID has catalyzed the use of Zoom. I mean, Zoom in general, for even for my work, I find reasons to use Zoom. I can imagine even using it once we're fully back, but a lot more. So what do you think that this has sort of catalyzed? I mean, we already talked about this a little bit, that, hybrid meetings and things like that, but what about even the idea of having workshops that are more virtual, spread around the year or things like that? I don't know what your thoughts might be on that.
We have seen that with some of the other societies have started to do things like that already. During, the SFN had what was the Global Connectome or something, and things like that, that were, this is sort of sprouting up. And so I think that it does, Fernando said it well, it's forced us to think about it more directly. And it's helping, I think, and it also it makes us think about the other opportunities. And as I said in the very beginning, when we opened up for the very first year, when we pivoted to virtual in the middle of the emergency, having more than 300 additional posters join, which so normally we had, we'll have 1,500 to 12 to 1,500, depends on the meeting year and so on. So, we think we had 1,200, and then we get 300 more. I mean, that's big, right? And it made us really realize how important that was. And then people have spoken up and just literally said, well, actually, I've been waiting for you to do this anyway, because independent of the pandemic, I was worried about the environment, or I couldn't travel because I didn't have money, or I just had a baby, or whatever it is. And so it makes you think about it a little bit. So I think the future is that, we've sort of, it's the psychological barriers, the first step always. Well, we were over the barrier, right? Now, we've been living this virtual life for the last 2 years. We're over the barrier a little bit. We understand that we can do it. The technology is now supporting us. There's going to be better and better technology. They're really, you said it in the beginning, these companies are popping up all over the place to meet this demand. Big multinationals are figuring out that they're going to get more work done and make more money because they can do things virtually instead of flying everybody all around the world, unless they need to do it. But, I think that the whole world is learning from this. And so I think for CNS, and I'll just sort of narrow back down to our society, we don't want to go back. We want to open the doors. We want to be more inclusive. We want to give people the opportunity. And we really appreciate that there are people that could come to the last 2 meetings who always wanted to come and never could. And it wasn't COVID, keep them away. It was other factors, all the ones we talked about. Yeah. And they could finally come. And I think that, that's just worth so much. It's why we're in this business, right? We disseminate knowledge and help train people. Randy said it earlier, to really make that change in the world. And so this, I think, is a big opportunity for us, and we don't want to go back.
Yeah. I have a fantasy, and I'm framing this very clearly. This is not yet and may never happen, but my fantasy is that this Planet Brain platform that we launched for last year's meeting, it has the kind of bones that has the opportunity to be like a 24/7 global available space for our members, right? Where you can log in and you can do your brain yoga in the corner, or you can join each other around little meeting tables and socialize, or for under-resourced places where they don't have easy access to meetings, online capabilities like this, that it could potentially be like everybody's home space, and that we could rent out. You basically just need to sign up for using the space because it might get really popular, and then we only have so many virtual rooms, we have to pay, our subscription goes up, or we have to program more. So like, maybe there's some minimal charge to use it, or to create accounts for your guests to come in and be a guest speaker there or something. But wouldn't it be cool to have like your own lounge that's your society's like hangout spot, and you could just go meet there anytime you wanted?
I love that idea. The whole idea is
that's my fantasy. I'm working on it, Peter.
It's like our kids have Minecraft, and they go there, they meet their friends online, and Planet Brain. I love it.
It's like your Discord it's like a Discord. Those of you who use Discord. But the nice thing is our environment actually has this wonderful thing where when you go into a room, it pops you in and it populates your little video screens like this, and you're literally sitting around the table talking in these little rooms like this. And it has a persistent chat. You can name your table. It has a lot of nice fun features, and
and then of course access to all the online talks and whatever, and you can
that's in the library. You can go down the hall and check out any talk you want.
Imagine having a whiteboard or all kinds of that's cool. I mean, I can imagine it growing like that. Yeah. Cool. I don't know if you have any thoughts. Fernando.
So I think, the big benefit, I think it is the increased reach that we have with the virtual component. And for example, I'm trying to think that only a few months ago, I was invited. I gave a talk on endorsed endorsed workshop in China, and they had 200,000 attendees to that workshop. Something that
Holy cow.
It is exactly that. Is the reach that you can have with this could be much bigger than we had before.
Yeah.
It also creates lots of opportunities for growth and expand to areas that we couldn't expand before. As I see the flip side of this, and that's maybe what we all are going to have to work very hard to avoid, is that there is a possibility that this is going to kind of discriminate and create some bias for some groups and communities. So we've been discussing, is it going to be like the group that goes to the in-person meetings and the groups that can't go either for language barriers or for financial reasons or for care responsibilities or for, environmental.
That's a really good point.
And is it going? So it's something that we're going to really have to work hard to avoid that situation that we create two communities that that's going to be very unhealthy if we end up in that situation. And we don't have them in that situation, but that's something that we're going to have to very consciously try to avoid. It's not going to happen just by default. So that's, I think, if you want the flip side of the disadvantage of what we're going to this situation.
So that has come up a lot as we were sort of mindfully deciding, what to do for this year. A lot of people lifted up ideas about, should we distribute the conference? So like, instead of being in one place, we would have simultaneous conferences that would occur in sort of the 3 different big geographical areas. And then, they'd be like spokes and wheels, and they could have little closing, like, could we have like little pilot ones, or should we, instead of having one big meeting, should we have multiple meetings that are smaller or local, or, so lots of variations on the theme that would help to address that kind of, situation. It's going to be one of the topics that we have a strategic planning retreat coming up for council, and that's actually one of the topics that we are going to sort of bang around some. I'm not sure we're going to figure it out, but we're going to be talking about it.
Okay. All right. Well, okay. Well, this has been useful, and it's sort of useful to me because, it's maybe useful to all of us because, one, there's different solutions potentially, and there's different constraints, but at the same time, there's a lot of similarity to what we're all going through here. And it seems that some of the conclusions we've all come to are sort of converging on this idea that, yes, we're going to have a meeting in the spring, and it's going to be pretty hard to cancel. We really don't want to cancel it or change it to purely virtual. And there will be some hybrid version. And I think actually it'll be useful. It's an experiment. I think that there's a lot of variables we won't anticipate that will just work out. And obviously there'll be good feedback from the membership as well. And we'll see what happens with all of these. So, but I think you're right. I think we all want to travel again. And I think that the perception is that it's above threshold for being safe, and the plus side far outweighs the risk right now. So.
And if you're going to be in leadership of these organizations, you have to be an incurable optimist.
That's true. That's true. All right. With that, I'd just like to thank all of you for taking the time to chat here. And I think that this will be we're going to try to, hopefully the people listening to this podcast, it's probably only about a week after we recorded this at the most, and we'll have it out. So, all right.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for that. I appreciate it. I appreciate it here. It's sort of nice to be, if you're in the trenches, it's nice to know you're in trenches with like really good people trying their best too.
Yeah, we're all dealing with this. We're all trying to figure it out.
Great. Thanks, Peter.
Neurosalience is brought to you by the Organization for Human Brain Mapping and is produced by Anastasia Brovkin, Ekaterina Dobrakova, Katie Moran, Niels Mullert, Kevin Seatek, and me, Rachel Stickland.